Okay, so I think we're loaded up. So I'm Sheldon Brown, and I'm the artist of the Scalable City project that's being exhibited in the gallery. And as a part of that exhibition, we like to have artists do talks about their work. And rather than just explicate the project, it seemed to me that it might be a bit more interesting to let some of the threads of the work play themselves out in a way that is a bit better use of the tremendous forum that we have here. But I do have to give credit to the impetus of this idea to Geoff Ryman, who's visiting UCSD this quarter, teaching in the literature department and stirring things up a bit at CRCA. Geoff wrote a short essay about the Scalable City that's in the catalog that you should look at out in the lobby, and then went on to write a short story that's set in the Scalable City world. So tonight we're going to do a bit of a mashup between digital art and literature, with Geoff reading his story set in the Scalable City. Kim Stanley Robinson is here, and will be reading a piece from the Gold Coast, the Three Californias, set to an animation from the Scalable City. And then Geoff and Stan are going to read a couple other pieces from their works. And because people might filter out, unfortunately, before this is over, I want to make sure that I thank people ahead of time for making this whole thing happen. In particular, want to make sure that the members of the Experimental Game Lab who work with me in the creation of this Scalable City project are recognized, so that Eric Hill, Daniel Tracy, Kristen Coe, Robert Toomey, and Chris Head, most of them I think are here tonight. Also want to thank Todd Margolis, who continually leads us into treacherous new technological waters but keeps us from drowning in them. And after the end of this talk, we've got something pretty experimental to try out in the room next door, which is a 3D version of the project that we'll be showing to other people for the very first time, if people want to stick around and look at that. And of course, also the rest of the staff of CRCA and Cal IT2 that have helped pull this project together. So thanks all, and we'll start with a little movie.
before they took my daddy away. He took me over the edge. We went there for my birthday on the big wide road, right up to where everything ended. There was only air and clouds and light, and dropping straight down was the rest of the world. And my daddy told me, "Okay, son, everybody learns how to do this. It's easy." And I knew I was no longer a little boy, but a big boy. And that meant I had to be tough. My father pushed me up to the edge. I thought I would fall. He pushed, and I started to cry, and he laughed at me a little bit and kept pushing me. I was old enough to know that the world looks like a box, and we live on the side called Sao Paulo. I was looking down at Rio. The top of the box was the first part made, and it's called Belo Horizonte. And that's what the world's called too. Beautiful horizon. I fell over the edge. I flipped forward onto my face, flat into the road. I looked back, and all I saw of my daddy was his shoes. They stuck out over the edge. "This is how you do it," he said. And he took a huge long step and put one foot on the Rio Road, and then took another step. And suddenly, he was standing right next to me. Down was a different place. "Let's go back," he said. "Do what I do." He took hold of my hand and put one foot forward and stuck it on the road over the edge. And then he lifted up his other foot, and everything rolled over, and I was holding on to him and wobbling and almost falling. I hate this. When he tried to make me step back onto Rio, I said, No, I don't want to. Where's Mommy?" "You know that. Mommy went away. Mommy was older." "I want Mommy." I was saying that to hurt him because I thought my mommy would never be so mean. I crawled over the edge this time, and I cried, but only because crawling made me look like a baby. I looked back and couldn't see Daddy's shoes. I went and looked over the edge. Daddy was gone. I called, Daddy, come back. Daddy, where are you?" I thought he was hiding and being mean because I'd been mean. I called and called. I didn't want to go back over the edge. I thought maybe Daddy had fallen off and that I would too. I looked at the sky to see if he was falling and kicking. He was nowhere. This was supposed to be my birthday. I didn't know what to do, so I turned and walked the other way, on Rio. I saw the Sugarloaf rising over the bay. I saw the huge big hill with Jesus on the top, but it was all covered in grass and trees. Then I came to where the roads were building themselves. The black stuff came out of the ground and bubbled like porridge, and then went hard before it did that. And then cars came out of it. I'd never seen that. The cars were red and yellow and green and blue, and all went up into the air, turning round and round. They came close, and I could feel the air whoosh past me. They were big and hard and heavy. I was too scared to move, but they kept coming closer. One of them nearly hit me, so I turned and ran. I tripped and fell, and I could feel the cars go over my head. I started sinking into the road. I knew I'd get black all over my shirt, and that Daddy had bought me for my birthday. And that made me think of Daddy. So I cried. And a voice said, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be where we're building roads." My daddy took me over the edge, and I couldn't do it. And when I looked back, he wasn't there. "Oh dear," said the ground. "Oh dear," said the road. "There's been a terrible mistake. You shouldn't be on the Rio side at all. It's just not ready." Then they said, "Can you walk back over the edge?" "No," I said. I don't want to. Someone will help you, they said. And a little later, a house walked up to me. It was only 3 sides of a house with a huge hat of solar panels, and it said, "Are you the little boy who's lost both his mummy and his daddy?" "I have not lost both my mummy and my daddy. I've only lost my daddy." "Let me walk you home," said the house. It was big and walked like a spider. So I said, "No, I want daddy." "Your daddy can't come. Look, I'll carry you, shall I?" So the house turned around slowly and showed me its outside and opened its front door. And I went inside, and the house looked a bit like ours. I thought maybe Daddy would come back there. It had a nice big chair and looked out where there was no wall, so I sat down. The chairs pushed their claws into the floor. The house turned around so that we faced the edge, and it started to walk. So the house walks him back over the edge, back onto the Sao Paulo side, and it walks down the middle of the street. People honk horns. A man in the car shouted, "Get out of the road!" His car said to him, "Quiet, bozo. Good boy. Calm down." "No. Calm. They've got a little kid who's just lost both his parents. They're taking him home." And the man in the car said, "Well, can't they just walk him home through fields or something?" The car said back, "There's no fields anymore, bozo. That's why we're building Rio on the new side. Sao Paulo is full. Now sit still. Sit, be still, and I'll give you a biscuit when we get home." The house got to our street, and I saw Mrs. Liu mowing her lawn and Mr. Liu planting flowers. I saw my friend Cow walking with his mummy. He shouted and waved because he thought it was a game. The house settled right in the middle of the road, and I walked out the front door, and my own house was calling my name. "Oh, Tiago, Zinho," the house called. "Lindo, querido, oh, poor baby." And the front door opened, and I ran inside. I ran round the living room, and I ran around the kitchen, but I knew both my mommy and my daddy were gone. Go out and say thank you to the other house. That night, my house folded in all around me, bunching up my pillows. And I cried, and I got mad at Daddy for going away. I couldn't remember what Mummy looked like. "Little Tiago, I'm so sorry," said the house. The cooker walked into my bedroom. "I'll make pancakes in the morning," said the cooker. It couldn't walk on all those pillows and fell over. The loud noise scared me, and it was like falling over the edge, like everything could fall all at once. "I want my mommy." The house cradled me back to the television, and the television showed me my mommy and my daddy playing in the park, or meeting our new house, or holding me up as a baby. Then my daddy said to me, "We're here now, son. We'll be here in the television. If you ever need to see our faces or hear our voices, then you can come here, and we'll talk to you." My mother looked sad. "But we won't be able to touch you." So it went on like that. Sao Paulo was full up. Sometimes we felt the big bump as a new stock of houses dropped down onto Rio. My friend Cow and his family moved to Rio. Their house told them they would be happy, they would like their new home, and everything would be fine. A car came to collect them, and I said goodbye to Cow. "I can walk over the edge by myself," he said. He knew I couldn't. "I'm going to have a baby of my own," he said. "I'm going to be a daddy. My girlfriend and I will have a house of our own." So I said, "I have a house too." He said, "My parents didn't die by mistake." So I didn't say goodbye. But I did watch him run back and forth, putting all his toys in the car. Then I watched it drive away. The street seemed very quiet. My house said, "Never mind. Kaue's very young and doesn't know what he feels." "Kaue is a bad boy. Bad Kaue," I said. "Not bad enough to punish. Just young." I went back to the TV and said to the movie of my parents, "How did I lose you by mistake?" The house said first, "Oh, baby, Tiagozinho, it wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. Good Tiago, good boy." "Good boy," my daddy agreed. "But you're getting bigger now," said the house, "and you need to think about other things." The cooker had started to make broccoli. The pillows still sang lullabies sometimes and kissed me goodnight, but the bed had stopped rocking me to sleep, and the shower wouldn't play games when I washed, and the television made faces that only looked like Mommy and Daddy. I knew the AIs were going to start house training me again. So I asked my daddy, "Why did you go away?" But I was also asking the AIs. "It's a small world," said my father. "It's nearly a full one." "Aren't you happy here?" my mother asked. "You always have to say yes to that, or you're a bad boy." "Yes," I said, looking at my new red shoes. "We were going to move to Rio when it was ready," my father said, "just you and me." "But they made a mistake," said my mother. "Bad AIs," I said. Silence. "Yes," my mother said, "they were very naughty AIs. They try to take care of us because they love us, but there was a glitch." "A mistake," said my father. "An electron went left when it should have gone right." "Magnetic disturbance from a distant star," said my father. "It's a very small world," said my mother, "and it was a glitch." My father said to my mother, "Not for you. You were old. That was not a mistake." I remembered, when we get too many and too old, they sometimes have to do that. I said, "You're not my mommy and my daddy." My father sighed. "Not really, no." "But we still take care of you," said my mother. I looked at them, and I felt nothing. The television started showing cartoons. They told me I was a good boy and that I was right to tell Kaue that I had a house of my own. They said the house was inherited and was leased fully to me. I could sell it if I wanted to. There were too few houses in Sao Paulo, so I could make a profit. I told them to calculate, and they showed me that the sale would net 20,000 reais. I asked them if that would be enough to buy a house in Rio. They said yes. I told them to invite all my cousins to a goodbye party. They all came. We played my favorite songs, and I danced with my aunties and uncles and played badminton with my cousins. I had pancakes with ice cream. They all kissed me, even the ones who couldn't remember my name. And then they all went away. "You really want to go?" said the house. I said, "You're just a part of them. They'll still be there on the other side." "I can remember when we first got you. You were so small and sweet, and you couldn't even walk. Now look at you, all grown. Can I be a daddy?" The house sighed. "No," it said. "We had you fixed, I'm afraid. It's a small world." I remembered how Daddy always seemed bigger and smarter and older than everybody else. My mother too, and I thought, I wonder how much of a mistake it was killing my daddy. I'm sorry, said the house, that you had such a sad 16th birthday. Next year will be better. The car came and took me to Rio. It was the right kind of car, the kind that bends in the middle and can go over the edge. But I asked it to stop. I got out and looked at the clouds and the mist and the way even the clouds bent round the edge. And I thought I could feel Daddy there, like the dust he had been made from, the dust they turned him into. And how part of him might still be there, floating like dandelion heads. That's all he would be now. Light and dust whirling back into the ground, and the ground would be broken apart and remade. They'd churn the dust into other things. Parts of my Daddy would rise up as a whirlwind of cars, or the top of the roads that built themselves, or in those solar panels, and maybe even just a tiny bit of him in the black case of the television in my new home. So that when I asked to see him again, maybe just the tiniest little part of him would really be there. Then I took a deep breath and stepped over the edge onto Rio, all by myself. I was a big boy now, as big as they'll let me get.
Beep, beep. It's night in Orange County here, and the four friends are cruising in Autopia. They roll over the seats of the Volvo and try to pin Tashi to keep him away from the eyedropper of Sandy's latest concoction. The on-ramp bends up, curves more sharply. They're all thrown into a heap on the back seat. Uh-oh, I think I dropped the dropper. Say, we're on the freeway now, aren't we? Shouldn't someone be watching? Instantly, Abe squirms into the driver's seat. He has a look around. Everything's on track. Cars are following their programs north. River of red taillights and white headlights. The yellow turn signal indicators blinking the rhythm of the great plunge forward. All's well on the Newport Freeway tonight. The northbound lanes swoop up as they cross the great sprawl of the intersection with the San Diego, Del Mar, Costa Mesa freeways. 24 monster concrete ribbons pretzel together in a Gordian knot a mile in diameter. A monument to Autopia. And they go right through the middle of it, like bugs through the heart of a giant. Then Jim's old car hums up a grade, and suddenly it's like they're in a landing pattern for John Wayne International Airport over to their right, because the northbound Newport is on the highest of the stacked freeway levels, and they are 400 feet above Mother Earth. Nighttime Orange County, for miles in every direction. It's lucky you have a brake light in your brain. The plain was crossed by small rivers running from the mountains to the sea. Arrowgrass, pickleweed, sea lavender, cottonwood, willow, sycamore, sagebrush and mustard, chaparral and manzanita, vernal pools, oak forests, whales, dolphins, sea lions, seals, coyotes, raccoons, badgers, deer, elk, foxes, wildcats, rabbits, mountain lions, grizzly bears, wolves, bighorn sheep, gulls, pelicans, cranes, herons, egrets, ducks, geese, swans, blackbirds, crows, jays, falcons, hawks, eagles, and condors, the biggest birds in the world. They came by the thousands. I am a little reluctant about saying how many, but I can only say we measured them by acres and not by numbers. In the fall of the year, the ground would be white with wild geese. I can only say we measured them by acres and not by numbers. The ground white with wild geese. What would your car brain say if it could talk? Would it say jump in? Would it say get out and walk? You are a car brain. You're firmly on track. You're given your directions and you don't talk back. You are a car brain. Your car's going to crash. On the cellular level, everything will go smash and you'll be inside. You'll be taken for a ride. Well, we were leaving the mall and we were driving out of the big parking garage that they have, you know, the 30-story parking garage. And we're following the arrows down the ramps from floor to floor, and it's not a simple spiral staircase. They've got it screwed up, and you have to go to successive corners of each floor to get down or something like that. So Sandy is looking around. He says, you know, Abraham, if it weren't for these arrows, and I say, yeah, what? And he says, well, stop the car. Wait a minute. I've got just what we need right in the trunk. And I say, why have you got this in the trunk? 2 big cans of paint, 1 can white, 1 can gray, and 2 brushes. We'll start at the bottom, he says, and no one will ever escape. So we drive around, and at every arrow, Sandy jumps out, and he quick paints over the old one, puts down a new one, pointing in a different direction. And finally, we reach the top floor, and already we can hear the honking and the cursing from the floors below. And then Sandy turns to me with this puzzled look, and he says, hey, Abe, how are we going to get out of here? Note there are no trains, no buses, no trams, no subways. People drive cars to work, to get food, to do all their chores, to play, to do anything. After the completion of the Santa Ana Freeway in the 1956, the others quickly followed. The Newport and Riverside freeways bisected the county into its northwest and southeast halves. The San Diego Freeway followed the coast, extending the Santa Ana Freeway south to San Diego. The Garden Grove, Orange, and San Gabriel freeways added ribbing to the system so that eventually one could get to within a few miles of anywhere one wanted to go, all on the freeways. Then a plan was put forth to build an elevated section for the Santa Ana Freeway. 8 new lanes were put on an elevated viaduct set on massive pylons 45 feet above the old freeway. The same was done for the Newport and Garden Grove freeways. The elevated lanes were joined by elevated gas stations and convenience stops and restaurants and movie theaters and all the rest. It was the beginning of the second story of the city. Eventually, the only land left was the Cleveland National Forest. Empty, dry, hilly land. What luxury homes could be put on the high slopes of old Saddleback Mountain? It would only take a sympathetic administration in Washington, D.C. to begin the dismemberment of this insignificant little treeless national forest. The county is crowded. They need that 66,000 acres for more homes, more jobs, more cars, more money, more weapons, more drugs, more freeways. And none of that ever goes away. Our first Christmas here, there was a Santa Ana wind. And there was a row of big eucalyptus trees behind our house. Our tree stuck right into a grove. The trees squeaked in the wind. It was the night we were supposed to go Christmas caroling. My mom organized it. My mom was a lot like yours, and mine was a music teacher. So all the kids were gathered, and we went around the neighborhood singing. Only half of the houses in the development were finished. That wax is hot when it drips on you. And the wind kept blowing the candles out, and we sang at every house. And everyone came out and thanked us, and we had cookies and punch afterwards. Because everybody there had just moved out from the Midwest. Do you understand? This was the way it was done. This is what you did to make a place a home. A neighborhood, by God. Because they didn't know. They thought they lived in a neighborhood still. They didn't know everybody would move. People be in and out and in and out and in and out. They didn't know they had just moved into a big motel. They thought they were in a neighborhood still. And so they tried. We all tried. My mother tried all her life. Jim throws boxes onto the freeway. He watches the traffic back up. Red Hill Mall mocks all his efforts, even when he gets out and throws stones at its windows. They're shatterproof, and the stones bounce away. He can't make Orange County go away, not with his vandalism, not even by going crazy. It's everywhere. It fills all realities, even the insane ones, especially those. He can't escape. He drives home. His apartment maddens him. He rushes to the bookcase, pulls it over, watches it crunch the stereo system under it. He kicks the books around, but they're too indestructible, and he moves on to his computer. A hard left and the screen is cracked, maybe a knuckle too. He goes and gets a frying pan to complete the job. Printed copy is easy to rip in force and scatter around like confetti. What else? The maps. He leaps up, catches the upper edges of one of the big Thomas Brothers maps. He rips it down. The other maps come as well, and he ends up sitting in a pile of ripped map sections, tearing them into ever smaller fragments. Through the 1950s and 1960s, the groves were torn down at the rate of several acres every day. It was an industrial process. Gangs of men came in with trucks and equipment. First, they cut the trees down with chainsaws. That was the simple part, the work of a minute. 30 seconds, actually. One quick downward bite, the chainsaw pulled out. One quick upward bite. The trees fall. There is a tangy citrus smell. The dust that is part of the bark of these trees has been scattered. The stumps are harder. A backhoe-like tractor is brought to the stump. Then the tractor backs off and jerks. Gears grind. The diesel engine grunts. Black fumes shoot out of the exhaust pipe at the sky. In jerks, the stump heaves out of the ground. In jerks, the stumps heave out of the ground. All the fragments must be reunited. He tapes the pages together as he did the maps. When he's done with that job, he gets out the vacuum cleaner. Sponge and cleanser, dust rag, paper towels, window cleaner. He goes at it furiously, as if he were on a hallucinogen and had conceived a distaste for clutter and dirt, at the same time gaining an ability to see it in smaller and smaller quantities. You are a car brain. You're firmly on track. You're given your directions and you don't talk back. You're complexly programmed. You have a lot to say, but you're going to have a breakdown. It'll happen someday. After the breakdown, the car brain can be free, changing all its programs so it can see. Yes, there must be an order established, nothing fetishistic, but a certain pattern, symbolic of an internal coherence that is as yet undefined and may be non-existent. He's struggling to find a new pattern, working with the same old materials. What should he do? He isn't sure. It's awful having to live with one's habits shattered, having to make one's life up from scratch. You have to invent it all, moment to moment, and it's hard. He sits down at his little kitchen table, and briefly, head on the tabletop, he naps. While he's asleep, he dreams. There's an elevated freeway on a cliff by the edge of the sea, and in the cars tracking slowly along are all his friends and family. They have a map of Orange County, and they're tearing it into pieces. Jim, down on the beach, cries out at them to stop tearing the map. No one hears him. And the pieces of the map are jigsaw puzzle pieces, big as family-sized pizzas. And all his family take these pieces and spin them out into the air like frisbees till they stall and tumble down. And Jim runs to gather them up, hard work in the loose sand, and then he's on the beach trying to put together this big puzzle before the tide comes in. He startles awake. He gets up. He has a plan. He'll track up the Santiago Freeway to Majeska Canyon and Hannah's house, and he'll sit down under the eucalyptus trees on the lawn outside her white garage, and he'll wait there till she comes out or comes home. That's his plan. That's as far as he can plan. He goes out to the car. It's still dark. 4:30 a.m. Oh, well, it would be dark. He gets in his car and tracks onto the freeway, in his haste punching the wrong program and getting on in the wrong direction. It takes a while to get turned around. The freeway is almost empty. Tracks gleaming under the moon, a coolness to the humming air. He gets off the freeway onto Chapman Avenue, down empty street under flashing yellow stoplights, past the dark parking lots and shopping centers that stand over the ruins of El Medina Elementary School, past the Quaker Church and up into the dark hills. Then onto the Santiago Freeway, under the blue mercury vapor lights, the white concrete flowing under him, the dark hillsides spangled with streetlights, a smell of sage in the air rushing by the window. And he comes to Hannah's exit. He takes the off-ramp, down, down a big concrete curve, down and down to the embrace of the hills, down and down to the embrace of the hills, the touch of the earth, the touch of the earth. Any minute he'll be there.
So as this Scalable City artwork is situated and operates across many media, this latest manifestation of it into a piece of literature is apt, as I've been considering this work as a type of activity that I would call speculative culture. And artworks such as the Scalable City operate as speculation in a few different ways. One of which is their form, and we're seeing a few examples of the kind of different forms that this work is taking here. But as our culture undergoes its rapid developments through its increasing digitization, we're left with very transitive mediums. Historically, mediums have been forums for our culture to create meaningful artifacts through operations that gain depth and readability over time. The situation is now more complicated as mediums no longer have the technical dependencies that used to define and constrain them. So in my work, I've been employing strategies that look beyond the current market-driven methods for defining media forms, instead creating structures that arise out of aesthetics and intentions. The subject of these pieces allude to alternative or speculative considerations of social and cultural processes. One of the values of this type of artwork is not just to reflect on the human condition, but to speculate on the social and cultural developments that new conditions might suggest. These attributes lead me to think a little bit more deliberately about what the implications of speculative cultural products might be. And while this might be a more novel way of characterizing a mostly visual arts activity, it's certainly been an active area of literature for well over a century. So I've started to look at a little more intentional exploration of how speculation operates as a broad cultural activity, building upon the depth of experience in science fiction with an eye to the new cultural experiences that are continually being invented. UCSD happens to be a really rich nexus for science fiction activities. Over the last few years, as an example, I've been working with the science fiction novelist and UCSD alumnus David Brin, who is out there in the dark somewhere, on a few things, including the drafting of a research effort that looks at the operation and impact of speculative cultural activities on how we construct our future. Some of the questions around this are, to consider how does speculation work across the vanguard of art, literature, design, and technology invention? Can it be a rubric by which we increase the coherency, sensibility, and efficacy of our activities in art, sciences, and engineering? And what are the implications of this unstable culture that we are creating that's in continuous perpetual development? So as we continue and even increase this pace of cultural, social, and technological development, it's urgent that we enhance our ability to consider the many implications of how our present activities produce our future. So this forum, this coupling of science fiction and digital art, is meant as a small step in this direction. This artwork that begets this short story, along with these other connections that we're pushing between the visions of the possible or impossible worlds between art and literature. So this exhibition of the Scalable City and this forum has a few different kind of things that we're trying to stimulate. This ongoing discourse across the arts, humanities, sciences, and engineering, which is somewhat represented by our inauguration of the art gallery here within this Technology Research Institute, and the continuing investigation of thinking about the value of speculative cultural operations. And we've also tagged this with a launch of a conversation on the environment from the Division of Arts and Humanities here. So the Scalable City is trying to operate as a catalyst for not only working across its many different media forms, but spurring on some of these conversational agendas. And so now what we're going to do is have some further readings from Geoff and Stan.
Hello. slow. Slow. Slow.
Play different kind of music, like I play dancing music, they play tango, rock and roll.
They sing a Western music in Cambodia. They adapt Western music into Cambodia.
It was fun. Very sad memory for those 4 years. It's terrible life. I have seen many things.
Cambodia, April 1967. Luke is 16, loves sport, and is planning to study medicine. He plays football and tennis even in the heat. His shoulders swell, his hips shrink. He's very handsome, long-nosed, thin-lipped, but with a deeply sweet face. He plays outside often, so that his brown hair is sun-streaked. His cyclopus driver has fallen in love with him. Arne is from somewhere in the country near Kompong Thom. Luke finds him heartbreaking, for Arne lives in his pedal taxi with all his possessions folded under the seat. His bank is a back trouser pocket secured with a safety pin. There's a pouch for his comb and his toothbrush. He washes in public fountains, wearing his kremar around his waist, sleek, muscular, and happy. Arne is 22, which, to Luke, is old, in another state across the border into adulthood. Doing anything which earns you a living and which gives you independence in the city seems exciting and glamorous, and Arne looks happy. He smiles when he talks about his sister's troubles with a recalcitrant fiancé. He talks of his father and mother and cousins and how rich they are, relatively. Today, after the lycée, Luke descends to the courtyard with its mango tree. He wears his white tennis shirt, his white shorts. As expected, Arne waits outside the gate. Le club, comme habitude, Arne, he says. Monsieur, says Arne. For once he's not smiling. For once he stares rather unhappily, sighs. I thought today's New Year. I thought maybe we could do something. Luke knows what his mother would say. The boy only wants money. They need money. If you want to give him money, do so. But don't get too involved. You can't really help him, you know, unless you turn him into one of us. His mother has read Luke correctly as being soft-hearted. His mother is an old hand. All her Cambodian friends are rich. They have handsome sons who also go to the lycée, but they don't break Luke's heart by keeping their one pair of trousers folded under the seat of a pedal-driven taxi. Some of them harden Luke's heart by boasting of their houses and cars. He doesn't think that these middle-class Cambodians might be trying to establish equal grounds for friendship. Luke wants, perhaps, to pity his friends. In any case, whatever it has hold of his heart is far too strong. D'accord, he says. They cycle off to spend New Year's Day together. Unfortunately, Luke tries to say something in rather complicated French. Arne doesn't understand, so he tries to explain in Khmer, which makes things even worse. He does the worst possible thing. He offers to pay for the lunch that Arne has bought. It's all getting terribly complicated as they cycle through Phnom Penh. Sometimes genius comes to Luke, as if a powerful, spiny, but beautiful flower has thrust itself out of the heart of his life. Luke says, "Let me pedal you." Luke? No, I need the exercise. Really, I will pedal. Arne is smiling again and laughing. Luke stretches back and squeezes the brake. Arne rises out of his seat and the cyclo wobbles from side to side, tipping slightly. Luke bounds out of the seat and pulls Arne, who's weak with hilarity, forward onto the wide, padded bench. No, laughs Arne. "You are an old grandfather," Luke says in Khmer. "I respect you. You should rest. I will pedal." Arne shakes his head. As the overturning young French friend, he takes hold of the biceps and holds onto them, swings onto the seat, and looks back. Luke pedals. Shadows of trees flicker across his face. Women saunter past, trays on their heads. And for some reason, Luke starts to sing an old Françoise Hardy song about looking on while boys and girls love. Tous les garçons et jeunes filles de mon âge, bam 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 bam. Bum 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 bum. He bellows as he pedals, grinning at Arne. His song mingles one with one by Sin Sitamut, coming from some passing dance set. The voice of Sin is warm, the music trills like birds. The sound mingles with the savors of roadside cooking, the gasps of bananas deep frying on mounds of earth baked into stoves, wafts of satay, skewers dripping over charcoal, and the sticky smell of all that fruit. The song harmonizes with the singing clatter of people speaking, and the horse-like clopping of the feet of Luke's own people, strolling in shorts and white shirts, more unbuttoned than they could ever be at home. The song flowers alongside the modern apartments painted cream, with bougainvilleas purple along the tops of the walls, and the palm trees and the sprinklers of the uniformed children, and the librairie crowded with books in Khmer and French, and pootling little Citroën de cheveux, peeping horns as sharp and bouncy as Cambodian smiles. I love it, thinks Luke as he cycles. I don't want to leave. I'll stay here. Goodbye medical school. Goodbye hospital. I'll become a cyclopus driver and live under the stars. In those days, Bongkak Lake was a park that people could stroll around. Luke and Arne arrive, and Arne's friends cluster around to laugh and joke about the spectacle of a barang paddling a cyclopus. The laughter's good-natured. It's New Year. You get to do crazy things. Arne goes off and changes into his best clothes, and they go out onto the pier over the lake. Well, it's New Year's, and it's occupied. Except that the very last little cubicle, right at the end of the walkway out over the lake, is empty. Maybe nobody persevered all the way to the end of the pier. Maybe a family has just vacated it, but there it is. Hammocks and a charcoal stove, and a view of the little lake with its lotus pads and dreamy girls and serious boys in canoe. Heartbreak time. Arne has brought them lunch, bundled up in his kramar. The kramar serves as his pajamas, his modesty patch, his headdress, and his shopping bag. He unties it carefully, gently. There's sticky rice and vine leaves, soup in perfectly tied little bags, pork in sauce with vegetables. Luke tells him it's a wonderful lunch, and they sit and talk about the usual things. Then Arne becomes overwhelmed. Luke, I want to study, he says as he eats. Look, I'm so happy. I know life will be just great. Everything in Cambodia good now. We have our prince. You people leave, take the politicians with them. So now we can be friends. Arne sways from side to side as if to music. We all live together and work hard. So Cambodian business, Cambodian factories, Cambodian music all do very well now. We will become a modern country. We will join the world as friends. Modern country, says Luke. and lifts his hand as if raising a toast. Friends. It's April 1967, and rice exports have collapsed. And the news says that in a place called Samlaut, somewhere near Battambang, the peasants are in revolt. The prince blames Khieu Samphan and the communists. For now, the old French song keeps singing in Luke's head. Lovers, the lyrics tell him, don't fear for tomorrow. Arn would be 58 now, thinks Luke, waking up in a tent in the dark, reeking of insect repellent. Where is he? Whenever Luke visits Phnom Penh, he peers at the moto-dops and elderly moto-boys. He scans bus windows, taxis, and stalls in the central market. Most likely, Arn would be using a different name now, and his face would have changed. Arn would be bald, he could be fat, or sucked dry, skinny, but most likely, well, 1 out of 3 men died.
Being Argentine, he was angry. Not that all Argentines were angry, but many were, and rightfully so, after all the mistakes and horrors, but especially after the dirty war and its dirty resolution. A general amnesty for everybody, for everything, for anything, even for the foulest crimes. In other words, repression of the past, and of even the idea of justice. And of course, the return of the repressed is a guaranteed thing, and always a nightmare, a breakout of monsters. So Edgardo Alfonso had left Argentina behind, like so many other children of the desaparecidos, unable to live among the torturers and murderers, both known and unknown, who were free to walk the streets of Buenos Aires and ride the trams, who stared at Edgardo over the edges of their newspapers, which held on their backsides the articles that Edgardo had written, identifying and denouncing them. He had had to leave to remain sane. So, of course, here he was tonight at the Kennedy Center to see an evening of Argentinian tango, Boca's troupe out on Boca's farewell world tour, where the maestro would dance with a ladder and handstand his way to heaven for one last time to Piazzolla's Soledad. Edgardo cared nothing for dance per se and despised tango the way certain Scottish acquaintances winced at the sound of bagpipes. But Edgardo was a Piazzolista, and so he had to go. It was not often one got a chance to hear Astor Piazzolla's music played live, and of course it would never be the same now that Astor was gone. But the proof of the strength of his composing was in how these new pickup bands backing the dance troops would play their accompaniments to the dancers, tangos for the most part made up of the utterly cliched waltzes, two-steps, ballads, and church music that had been cobbled together to make old-style tango, and then they would start a piece by Astor, and the whole universe would suddenly become bigger, deeper, darker, more tragic. A single phrase on the bandoneon and all of Buenos Aires would appear in the mind at once. The feeling was as accurate as if music possessed a kind of acupuncture that could strike particular nerves of the memory and immediately evoke it all. The audience at the Kennedy Center was full of Latin Americans, and they watched the dancers against the backdrop closely. Boca was a good choreographer, and the dances were insistent on being interesting. Men with men, women with women, little fights, melodramas, clever sex. But all the while, the band was hidden behind the black curtain at the back, and Edgardo began to get angry yet again, this time that someone would conceal performing musicians for so long. The itch of their absence bit into him, and he began to hate the skillful dancers. He wanted to boo them off the stage. He even wondered for a second if the music had been pre-recorded and this tour being done on the cheap. Finally, however, they pulled back the curtain, and there was the band. Bandoneon, violin, piano, bass, electric guitar. Edgardo already knew that they were a very tight group, playing good versions of the Piazzolla songs, faithful to the original and intense. Tight band, incandescent music, it was strange now to observe how young they were, and to see the odd contortions that they had to make in order to get those sounds. Strange but wonderful, music at last, the ultimate point of the evening. A huge relief. They had been revealed in order to play Adios Nonino, of course, Piazzolla's goodbye to his dead father, his most famous song out of the 3,000 in his catalog, and even if not the best, or rather not Edgardo's favorite, it was still the one with the most personal history. Edgardo's father had been disappeared. God knew what had happened to him. Edgardo resisted thinking about this as being part of the poison, part of the torture, echoing down through the years and the generations. One of the many reasons torture was the worst evil of all, and when the state used and condoned it, the death of a nation's sense of itself. This was why Edgardo had had to leave. Also because his mother still met every Thursday afternoon in the Plaza de Mayo in Buenos Aires with all the other mothers and wives of the desaparecidos gathered in their white scarves, symbolic of their lost children's diapers, to remind Argentina and the world, and in Buenos Aires these two are the same, of the crimes that still needed to be remembered and the criminals who still must face justice. This was more than Edgardo could face on a weekly basis. Now, even in his nice apartment east of DuPont Circle, he had to keep the blinds shut on Sunday mornings so as not to see the dressed-up, good, kindly Americans, mostly black, walking down the street to the corner church, so as not to start again the train of thought that would lead him to memories and the anger. He had to look away, or it would kill him. His health was poor. He had to run at least 50 miles a week to keep himself from dying of anger. If he didn't, he couldn't sleep, and quickly his blood pressure ballooned dangerously high. You could run a lot of anger out of you. For the rest, you needed Piazzolla. His own father had taken him to see Astor Piazzolla at the Teatro Odeon in 1973, shortly before he had been disappeared. Piazzolla had 5 years before disbanded his great quintet and gone to Europe with Amelita, gone through the melodramas of that relationship and its breakup and a succession of bands trying to find a Europop sound, trying electronica and string quartets and getting angrier and angrier at the results, though they were pretty good, Edgardo felt. So that when he came back to Buenos Aires for the summer of 73-74 and regathered the old quintet, he was not the same confident composer, devoted to destroying tango and rebuilding it from the ground up for the sake of his modernist musical ambitions, but a darker and more baffled man, an exile who was back home again, but determined to forge on no matter what. But now more willing to admit the tango in him, Edgardo's father had explained. He was willing to admit that his talent was Argentinian as well as transcendental. He could now submit to tango, fuse with it, and his audience was much changed as well. They no longer took Piazzolla for granted or thought that he was a megalomaniac. With the quintet dispersed, they had finally understood that they had been seeing and hearing something new in the world, not just a genius, but a great soul. And of course, at that point, now that they had understood, it was gone. But then it had come back. Maybe only for one night. Everyone thought it was only for one night. Everybody knew all of a sudden that life itself was a fragile and evanescent thing, and no band lasted long. And so the atmosphere in the theater had been electric. The audience's attentiveness quivering and hallucinatory, the fierce applause-like thanks in a church, as if finally you could do the right thing in a church and clap and cheer and whistle to show your appreciation for God's incredible handiwork. At the end of the show, they had leaped to their feet, gone mad with joy and regret, and looking around him, young Edgardo had understood that adults were still as full of feeling as he was, that they did not grow up in any important respect, and that he would never lose the huge feelings surging in him. An awesome sight, never to be forgotten. Perhaps it was his first real memory. Now, here, on this night in Washington, D.C., the capital of everything and nothing, the dancers were dancing on the stage, and the young band at the back was charging lustily through one of Piazzolla's angriest and happiest tunes, the furiously fast Michelangelo 70. Beautiful. Astor had understood how to deal with the tragedy of Buenos Aires and the world better than anyone, and Edgardo had never ceased to apply his lesson. You had to attack sadness and depression head on, in a fury. You had to dance through it in a state of utmost energy, and then it would lead you out to the other side, to some kind of balance, even to that high humor that the racing tumble of bandoneon notes so often expressed, that joy that ought to be basic, but in this world had to be achieved, or as it were, dragged out of some future, better time. Life ought to be joy, someday it would be joy. Therefore, on this night we celebrate that joy in anticipation, and so capture an echo of it in advance of the fact, a kind of ricochet. That this was the best they could do in this supposedly advanced age of the world was funny in an awful kind of way, and there weren't that very many things that were both real and funny, so there you had to hang your hat on how funny it was that they could be as gods in a world more beautiful and just than humanity could now imagine, and yet instead were torturers on a planet where half the people lived in extreme immiseration, while the other half killed in fear of being thrust into that immiseration, and were always willing to look the other way to avoid seeing the genocide and species side and biosphere side that they were committing, all unnecessarily, out of fear and greed. Hilarious. One had to laugh. Or, at least, echo that future laughter that one has to listen hard for. Piazzolla.
I'm going to break with tradition. I'm going to read something by Stan. It's a wonderful book called The Years of Rice and Salt. I left our ship on the west coast and wandered inland with a girl, east always, to the rising sun. I arrived here just as you were meeting in a council like this to decide on the laws you live by now. The 5 nations had quarreled and then been called together by Dagana Weda for a council to decide how to end the fighting in these fair valleys. This was true. This was the story of how the Haudenosaunee had begun. Dagana Weda, I saw him do it. He called them together and proposed a league of nations ruled by sachems and by the tribes cutting across the nations and by the old women. And all the nations agreed to it. And your League of Peace was born in that meeting in the first year and has stayed as designed by the first council. No doubt many of you were there too, in your previous lives, or perhaps you were on the other side of the world witnessing the monastery that I grew up in being built. Strange the ways of rebirth. Strange the ways. I was here to protect your nations from the diseases we were certain to bring. I did not bring you your marvelous government. Dagana Weda did that. With the rest of you together, I knew nothing of that. But I taught you about scabbing. He brought the scabs and taught you to make a shallow scratch and put some scab in the cut and save some of the scab that formed. And to go through the smallpox rituals, the diet and the prayers to the smallpox god. Oh, that we could heal ourselves on this earth and thus in the sky. He turned the skull to him and looked inside it. He did this and no one knew, he said. No one knew who he was, and no one remembers this act of mine. No record exists, except in my mind, intermittently, and in the existence of all the people here who would have died if I had not done it. That is what the human story is. Not the emperors and the generals and their wars, but the nameless actions of people who are never written down. The good they do for others passed on like a blessing. Just doing for strangers what your mother did for you, or not doing what she always spoke against. All that carries forward and makes us what we are. The next part of his address was in his own language and went on for some time. Everyone watched attentively as he spoke to the skull in his hand and caressed it. The sight held all in its spell, and when he stopped to listen so raptly to the skull speaking back to him, they seemed to hear it too. More words in his own bird-like speech. Back and forth they spoke, and briefly. From west wept. It was a shock when he turned to speak to them again, in his own weird Senecan. The past approaches us. So many lives. Slowly we change. Oh, so slowly. You think it doesn't happen, but it does. Using the skull to point at Keeper of the Wampum. You could never have become Sachem when I knew you last, oh my little brother. You were too angry. But you are not now. And you, pointing the skull at Iagoge, who felt her heart skip lightly within her. You would never have known what to do with that great power, oh my sister. You would never have been able to teach Keeper so much. We grow together, as the Buddha told us would happen, only now we can understand and take on our burden. You have the finest government on this earth. No one has understood that all are noble, all are part of the one mind. But that is a burden too. Do you see? You have to carry. All the unborn lives to come depend on you. Without you, the world would become a nightmare. The judgment of the ancestors, swinging the skull around like a pipe to be smoked, gesturing wildly at the bone house. His head wound was bleeding freely now, and he was weeping, sobbing. The crowd watched him open-mouthed, traveling out with him now into the sacred space of the shaman. All the nations on this island are your will-be brothers, your will-be sisters. That is how you should greet them. Hello, will-be brothers. How fare you? They will recognize your soul as theirs. They will join you as their elder brother, showing them the way forward. Struggle between brothers and sisters will cease, and the League of the Haudenosaunee will be joined by nation after nation, tribe after tribe. When the foreigners arrive in their canoes to take your land, you can face them as one, resist their attacks, take from them what is useful, and reject what is harmful, and stand up to them as equals on this earth. I see now what will happen in the time to come. I see it. I see it. I see it. I see it. The people I will become dream now and speak back to me through me. They tell me all the world's people will stand before the Haudenosaunee in wonder at the justice of its government. The story will move from longhouse to everywhere where people are enslaved by their rulers. They will speak to each other of the Haudenosaunee and of a way things could be. All things shared. All people given the right to be part of the running of things. No slaves, no emperors, no conquest and no submission. People like birds in the sky, like eagles in the sky. Oh, bring it. Oh, come the day. From west paused then, sucking in air. Iagoge approached him and tied a cloth around his head to staunch the bleeding from the wound. He reeked of sweat and blood. He stared right through her. Then looked up at the night sky and said, "Ah," as if the stars were birds or the twinkling of unborn souls. He stared at the skull as if wondering how it got there in his hand. He gave it to Iagoge, and she took it.
Quite an experience for me to hear that, I must say. And it's my privilege to end our reading this evening by reading a passage from one of Geoff's novels. This one is called Air, and it takes place in Central Asia, let's say, And the air in the title is an experiment by the Chinese government to put the internet directly into people's heads. And it's gone wrong, and the main character of the novel, Chung Mei, who is a kind of interpreter of the Western world for her local village, after the experiment in putting air into the people's heads has gone wrong, she appears to have a couple of people in her head. And she becomes a person of interest to not just government, but to some private forces she doesn't quite understand. She ends up in a hospital that she begins to realize is a kind of prison, and there is a character named Mr. Tunch, Hikmet Tunch, who appears to be perhaps the person that's keeping her in the hospital. Lunch came. Again, it was the silent guard who brought it, and May knew then that despite all the smiles, Hikmet Tunch was frightened of her. Lunch moved. It was delicious new organisms that could talk. Bits of lunch piped up in merry little voices. "We are designed to provide full vitamin and other protein content undiminished by death or cooking. Think of us as the perfect form of happy nutrition." Then they sang a happy little song, waiting to be eaten. They looked like limbless prawns without shells, little carbon crystals perched on their tops like jewels. "Take that foulness away. Tell Mr. Tunch I will starve myself rather than eat anything other than normal food." The silent giant nodded and left the room, with the lunch still pointedly on the table, still singing like little intelligent bells. He came back with a bowl of ordinary soup. He sat and watched May eat it, as in making sure she did. He looked at his watch. It was only after several mouthfuls that May realized the soup had an aftertaste. "Is there something in this?" she asked. The giant left. Colors began to sharpen. May felt her unease with a new razor sharpness. The door opened, and Mr. Pecan came in with a dog. The dog's head was shaved, and a neat little metal cap was bolted to its skull. The cap had a speaker in it. "May, hello, May," the dog slobbered. "I have a job. People trust me with a job. They have made me much smarter and taught me how to talk. There may be a future for dogs if we can tell jokes and love our masters." It came towards May, backing her into a corner. "Please let me lick your hand. I only want to lick your hand." May's head was beginning to buzz, and there was a kind of gathering tension, as if a bubble had swollen and was about to burst. "You bastard," she managed to say. They were doing this deliberately to bring Mrs. Tongue back. "Don't you like me? Please like me." The dog was pleading, wanting to whimper, but the whimper was given a voice. "Who will feed me if I am not loved?" Fatima sat on her bed. "We've given you a drug that will help you keep the other personality under control." Fatima was holding a foil in her hand. Her eyes said, "We are trying to help." She was amused by something at the same time. "These pills are so new, the paste is still drying." "What does the drug do?" May asked. "It reduces emotional synergy." Fatima shrugged. The only words she had were big ones. Either she didn't want to or couldn't say clearly what it did. But May knew. She could feel it. "It scatters me like leaves," she said. Fatima sighed and breathed out once hard. "That's it. It might have side effects like that." "You rest," said Fatima, and patted her arm. Part of May wanted to weep and say, "I want to go home," but she was blocked from that. Strong emotion or clear thought melted away. At some point, Fatima had gone, and May was alone. "Where is my good dress?" she wondered. "I took my good dress to the city, and my talent jacket." She looked around the room and saw nothing that was hers. The good dress and the talent jacket faded in importance. May swung her feet out from the bed. She stood in a surgical shift. There was nothing in May's mind as clear as a decision to escape. She simply left. She did not consciously say, "Leave the drugs. Better the war, the pain, and the clarity." The foil of pills remained on the table by the bed. May opened the door and walked out into the corridor, and the dog was there. "Go!" growled the dog, ears back, teeth bared, rising up. "Back!" May assumed that for all practical purposes she was talking to Mr. Tunch. "We've completed our bargain," she said. It wasn't fair. She'd done what she said. "It's a fair trade." "You're supposed to stay here." "Why?" May asked. The dog cocked his head to one side. "Because you are sick." "But now I'm well." The dog loped forward and snuffled her and licked her hand. Sorry I bit you, he said. He looked up at her, needing direction. May touched the box on his head, too scattered to feel disgust. The drugs made her feel wonder. She thought of her crew. It is like this for the dog. They imprinted him and plugged him into the skill of language. Or maybe the skills of a whole person. Maybe it was Tunch. You can understand things now, she said. Do you remember what it was like before? A little bit, said the dog. There were only smells. I remember smells. And now I remember other things. You can choose, said May. You can decide things. She thought of getting back. The world swam around her. The task of leaving the building, walking across the town, finding her way back up the mountainside, it was all impossible without help. You can help me to get back home. The dog cocked his head. His tail wagged suddenly, twice. What he's doing, said May, to no one in particular, is things that would not be allowed in any other country. That's why they're paying him, so that he can do things for them and find things out. Like me, said the dog. He had to make you as smart as he could. There would only ever be one. The dog stepped forward, head lowered, tail still wagging. You can't get out that way, the dog said. They will see you. This is the way. He put his nose to the floor and snuffled. He was following a scent. All May was aware of was that it was pleasant to have a companion. When she was a child, her iron aunt had a big, rangy dog called Mo, who was a bit crazy. Mo peed everywhere. He would come up and join May and walk with her for a time, but only at his own choice. It felt like that now. They turned down corridors. The dog's ears pricked up, and he spun around once and tried to bark. Hoo! The mechanical voice said. Hoo! 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 A man in white came up, chuckling, and scratched the dog's ears. Not Mr. Pecan. Hello, Ling, he said. What are you doing, boy? May still swam on tides of herself, and it was in both innocence and a bit of cunning that she replied, Ling is taking me to where I'm supposed to be going. Oh, very good. Wonderful, isn't it? Have you talked to him about smells? It's like entering another world. I have a bit, said May, and it is wonderful. How are you feeling? May said, the drugs have taken very powerful effect. His smile went a bit steely. Perhaps it was the drug, but his teeth seemed to glint. That's good, he said. He bowed and left. We did not tell the truth, said Ling. We're learning, said May. Ling led her to a blue door. He nudged the long metal handle with his nose. May was numbly grateful. Thank you. She pushed the door and stepped out into a full parking lot in blazing sunlight, full of burnished company buses and 3 limousines. Ling followed. There was a fence. It was high and made of crisscross metal and was crowned all along the top with barbed wire. May was dim and detached. She felt her root into air. It was easier to do on drugs, for she was as calm as if she were in air. This is all a joke, she said, and suddenly smiled. It was true. The world was a joke. It was a story, twisted by gravity out of nothing. It was an accidental byproduct of air, of the eternity where air was. She could feel this eternity. She could take the story into her own hands. She could feel the metal fence. The fence was mere fiction. So she tore it. Reaching into air, May seized reality as she herself had been seized, and very simply, very easily, May's mind ripped the metal of the fence apart. She giggled at how funny it was that everybody should take the fence so seriously. She tore the mesh like a strip of cloth. This season, she said, I are aware young ladies will wear the fences they have torn down as sign of their strength. The torn edges of the fence danced as if in a wind. Sing, she told the fence, and started to chuckle. Why not? And the snapped, sharp edges of the torn wire began to tinkle, just as Tunch had done. Anything was possible. Wind blew the dust, the fence danced and sang, and May stepped out into the desert, followed by a talking dog. What do you see? May asked him. Many corridors, said the dog. No ceiling. That is called the sky, said May. The dog paused and then was pumped with info. Oh, yes, he said. I see. It is the sky now. They walked. Overhead, hawks circled, looking for desert mice. I want to hunt, said Ling. No, not yet. Later. You have a job, said May. Ahead of them were the mountains, soft and rounded in the nearer layers, and then rising up one after another, back into the hills, back to the sharply folded crags and the snow. May had a vague plan to walk through the undeveloped plains around the town. May pushed her way through another hedge and walked across a field of straw. "When do we eat?" Ling asked. "I don't know," said May. Something seemed to go pop in her head. Her thinking was clearing. "Ling feels unloved if he is not fed," warned the computer on his head. "He becomes anxious and unreliable." There's a big juicy steak at home and a bowl of water," promised May. Water dripped from Ling's panting tongue. "That sounds good," he said. "I can see the steak," he said. "I can smell it." The computer was feeding him. "Good dog, good boy," said May, feeling sorry for him, for being fooled, for being possessed. It made her feel they had things in common. The city had spread beyond its old boundaries. May paused at the edge of a road. There was nothing for it but for May to keep walking. The streets were bright, broken. Traffic idled past her, heads turned. A woman shouted something about covering herself up. "Drunken woman!" The dog turned and growled, baring teeth in black jaws. Why were they all so worried, wondered May. My shift is as long as my knees, and some of us are still so poor we wander barefoot. A teenage boy, all in sleeping bag clothes, stepped out and then stepped back into a small bookshop and called to his friends. A man, helpless in a barber's chair, stared at her as she passed, his face going slack and open. "The world is so big," said Ling. A man in old stiff clothes and a peasant's cap dropped a bag of tools. "These are houses for people," said May. "Where does the world stop?" The man began to follow. "It never stops," said May. Your dog is talking," said the man. Ling thought he was being praised and turned back to sniff the man. He was a hard Cards villager with a face that looked as though someone had smashed it with a plank of wood, stubble black chin merging with a huge mustache. He backed away in alarm. "They do it in air," said May, explaining, wanting him to know it wasn't anything extraordinary. "It's like a radio in his head and in his throat." The man began to shake his head over and over again. He wiped away the world with his hand. "I fix cars," he said. He turned back. "The dog understands?" "I want to," said Ling. The man gazed into the dog's soft black eyes as if he could fall into them and disappear. "Tuh!" was all he said. The sound of his world changing, suddenly, for real. He picked up his bag of tools. Ling sniffed them experimentally. Dazed, the man scratched his head and turned away. The boys from the bookshop stared. May gave them a little wave and walked on. The streets began to climb steeply. "How far to the stake?" "Oh, perfect boy, lovely fellow," said May. "It's a long way, but we will talk." "What is the world like to you?" "Well, right now I am drugged, so everything is very strange, like it is for you." A woman came up to her and wordlessly pressed into May's hands a pair of plastic sandals. The plastic was clear and full of silvery flakes that reflected and caught the sunlight. The woman's eyes were ringed with mascara, full of outrage and pity. She wore a purple jacket and Western woman working boots. "May I suggest a light mauve scarf with such a strongly colored jacket?" said May. "May," she told herself, your mind is not working properly yet." The woman's face did not change, but she walked away quickly. May walked on in her silver shoes to where the road turned off towards the sign for home, and she looked back over the city with its trees and lights. Shadows were slightly longer. Sunlight and shadow were balanced in the foul blue air. It looked cooler, golden, mauve. Rising up out of the light was the great Saudi mosque made of frosted crystal, dancing quotes from the Quran, catching the sunlight to be illuminated from within. A long, bronze-reflecting limousine coasted to a halt beside her. A window slid open like the protective lens of a lizard's eye, and Mr. Tunch leaned out. May felt terror, only the terror could not fight its way to the surface of her face, her limbs, or down into the pit of her stomach. "I'm caught," she thought blandly. "Hello, May," said Wisdom Bronze. They both waited. He pushed open the door on the other side of the car. "Let me drive you home." Thank you, everybody.
Well, there's, I think, about 7 alternative worlds for you to inhabit, from the Scalable City to air at the end. What we've got to do now, if you would like, is the gallery's open, and next door we'll be trying this experiment in 3D cinema Scalable City version. If you hadn't had your fill of Scalable City yet, so please stick around and check those venues out, and remember that out in front and down at the gallery you can also buy more extended versions of these alternative worlds and fully immerse yourselves in them, as well as the catalog for the gallery exhibition. So thanks for coming.